The blue marble. The summer Harry arrived in Silver Pine, everything felt unfamiliar. The town was much smaller than the city he had grown up in, and the silence was almost unsettling at first. Back home, there were always cars, crowded streets, and people rushing from one place to another. Here, the loudest sounds in the morning were birds singing outside the window and the gentle rustling of leaves whenever the wind passed through the trees. Harry had come to stay with his aunt for 3 months before starting university in the fall. She owned a small guest house near the lake and needed extra help during the tourist season. Although Harry agreed without much hesitation, he secretly worried he would spend the entire summer feeling lonely. He had never been particularly good at making friends. Conversations often exhausted him, and he usually preferred observing people rather than joining them. Most days followed the same routine. He woke up early, helped prepare breakfast for guests, carried luggage, cleaned rooms, and completed whatever tasks his aunt assigned him. The work kept him busy, but once evening arrived and the guest house became quiet, a familiar emptiness settled inside him. To pass the time, Harry brought his sketchbook everywhere. Drawing had always been his escape. Whenever words failed him, pencils and paper felt safer. He sketched trees, boats, clouds, old buildings, and occasionally strangers he saw around town. The pages slowly filled with scenes from Silver Pine, though none of them felt complete. Something was missing. Harry couldn't explain what. One warm afternoon, after finishing work earlier than expected, he decided to explore a forest trail he had never visited before. Several locals had mentioned a beautiful viewpoint on the northern side of the lake, and curiosity eventually won. The path wound through tall pine trees that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. Sunlight filtered through the branches, creating shifting patterns of gold and green across the ground. Harry walked slowly, enjoying the cool shade and the peaceful atmosphere. For the first time since arriving, he felt his thoughts quiet down. The further he walked, the more distant the town became. Eventually, he reached a clearing overlooking the water. The sight immediately stole his breath. The lake shimmered beneath the afternoon sun, its surface sparkling like thousands of tiny crystals. A gentle breeze moved across the water, carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers. Harry instinctively reached for his sketchbook. Before he could begin drawing, however, another sound caught his attention. Music. Soft guitar notes drifted through the air, blending naturally with the sounds of nature. Harry followed the melody until he spotted someone sitting on a large rock near the shoreline. The young man appeared completely relaxed, one leg bent while his fingers moved effortlessly across the guitar strings. His dark hair shifted slightly in the wind, and his expression was peaceful, almost thoughtful. Harry froze without realizing it. There was something strangely captivating about the scene. It looked less like reality and more like a moment from a film. The music continued for several minutes. Harry should have announced his presence or walked away, but instead he remained hidden behind a tree, listening. The melody was beautiful. It carried a quiet sadness that reminded him of summer evenings and memories he couldn't quite reach. When the song finally ended, Harry prepared to leave unnoticed. Unfortunately, a branch snapped beneath his shoe. The sound echoed through the clearing. The guitarist immediately turned his head. "You know," he said calmly, "most people say hello before spying on someone." Harry's entire body tensed. Embarrassment rushed to his face. "I wasn't spying," he replied far too quickly. The stranger raised an eyebrow. "No?" "I was listening." "Ah, that's a much better defense." His lips curved into a smile. Harry stepped out from behind the tree, wishing the ground would swallow him whole. Up close, the young man looked slightly older than him, perhaps 23 or 24. His features were handsome but approachable, and there was a warmth in his eyes that immediately softened Harry's nervousness. "Sorry," Harry muttered. "I really wasn't trying to be rude." "It's okay." If someone was going to interrupt me, at least you waited until the song ended. Harry laughed despite himself. The tension between them eased instantly. "I'm Harry, Albert." They shook hands. The introduction was simple, yet something about it felt oddly important. Albert placed his guitar beside him and gestured toward the empty space nearby. "You can sit if you want." Harry hesitated only briefly before accepting. They spent several moments watching the lake in silence. Surprisingly, it wasn't awkward. Most silences made Harry uncomfortable, but this one felt natural. It was Albert who eventually spoke first. "You're not from here." Harry looked at him. "How can you tell? You keep staring at everything." Harry laughed. "Is it that obvious?" "A little. I've only been here for 2 weeks." Albert nodded. "That explains it. You grew up here?" "My entire life." There was a hint of affection in his voice as he looked across the lake. "I left for college for a few years, but I came back. Most people leave small towns and never return. Most people do." Albert smiled faintly. "But I like it here." Harry understood immediately. Sitting beside the lake, surrounded by mountains and endless blue sky, it was difficult not to. Their conversation continued effortlessly. They talked about books, music, favorite childhood memories, and future plans. Harry learned that Albert worked at an outdoor recreation center and spent much of his free time hiking, kayaking, or playing guitar. Albert learned that Harry hoped to become an illustrator someday, though Harry admitted the dream still felt distant and unrealistic. "Can I see your sketches?" Albert asked. Harry nearly refused out of habit. Showing his artwork always made him nervous. Still, something about Albert's sincerity encouraged him. He handed over the sketchbook. Albert examined each page carefully. Unlike most people, he didn't flip through quickly or offer empty compliments. He studied the drawings as though they genuinely mattered. After several minutes, he looked up. "These are incredible." Harry immediately shook his head. "They're not. Why do artists always say that?" "Because we're realistic." Albert laughed. "No, you're too hard on yourselves." He pointed toward one drawing of the lake. "Look at this. You captured the light perfectly." Harry felt unexpectedly shy. Praise had never been easy for him to accept. Yet Albert sounded completely genuine. For the first time, he found himself believing the compliment. The afternoon slowly slipped away. Shadows lengthened across the water, and the golden light of evening painted the entire landscape in warm colors. Neither of them seemed eager to leave. Eventually, Albert stood and stretched. "I should probably head back." Harry nodded, feeling strangely disappointed. The realization surprised him. They had only met a few hours ago. Why did saying goodbye already feel difficult? As if reading his thoughts, Albert reached into his pocket. "Wait," Harry paused. Albert pulled out a small blue glass marble and placed it in his palm. The surface caught the sunset, reflecting shades of blue, gold, and silver. It was simple, yet remarkably beautiful. "For me?" Harry asked. Albert nodded. "My grandfather used to collect these when I was a kid." Harry carefully turned the marble between his fingers. It reminded him of the lake itself. "Why are you giving it away?" Albert looked toward the horizon. For a brief moment, his smile became softer, almost nostalgic. "My grandfather always said beautiful things shouldn't stay hidden forever." Harry glanced down at the marble. Somehow the gift felt far more meaningful than its size suggested. "Thank you." Albert smiled. "You're welcome." They began walking back toward town together as the sky transformed into shades of orange and pink. Their conversation continued the entire way. By the time the guest house finally came into view, darkness had begun settling over Silver Pine. They exchanged numbers before parting. It was a simple action, one that people performed every day, yet Harry couldn't stop smiling afterward. Later that night, lying in bed, he placed the blue marble on the table beside him. Moonlight reflected across its surface, making it glow softly in the darkness. Harry stared at it for a long time. Somewhere beyond the window, the lake remained quiet beneath the stars. The town slept peacefully. For the first time since arriving in Silver Pine, Harry no longer felt alone. He didn't know why meeting Albert felt different from meeting anyone else. Maybe it was the easy conversation. Maybe it was the way Albert listened without judgment. Maybe it was the feeling that somehow, despite knowing each other for only a single afternoon, they had understood one another immediately. Whatever the reason, one thing became clear as Harry drifted toward sleep. When he woke up tomorrow, he hoped he would see Albert again. The next morning, Harry woke up earlier than usual. For several seconds, he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling as though he had forgotten something important. Then his eyes landed on the blue marble resting beside the window, and a smile appeared before he could stop it. Sunlight passed through the glass, scattering small reflections across the wall. Somehow, seeing it made him remember everything from the day before the lake. The music, Albert's laugh, and the strange sense of comfort he had felt in his company. Harry quickly told himself not to overthink it. Albert was simply someone he had met. A new friend. Nothing more. Yet, throughout breakfast preparations at the guest house, he found himself glancing toward his phone more often than usual. By noon, he felt ridiculous for expecting a message. By 1 o'clock, he had convinced himself Albert was probably busy. At 2 o'clock, his phone finally vibrated. The message was simple: "Are you working today?" Harry stared at the screen for several seconds before replying. "Finished an hour ago." Albert's answer arrived almost immediately. "Good, meet me at the pier in 20 minutes." Harry laughed softly. "That's not really asking." "You're right." A few moments later, another message appeared. "Would you like to meet me at the pier in 20 minutes? Harry shook his head while smiling. Yes, when he arrived at the lakeside, Albert was already there, sitting on the edge of the wooden dock with his feet hanging above the water. He looked up as Harry approached. "You're late." Harry checked his watch. "I'm 2 minutes early." "Exactly. I got here 10 minutes ago." Harry laughed and sat beside him. The lake stretched endlessly before them, calm and bright beneath the summer sun. For a while, neither of them spoke. Harry was beginning to realize that silence felt different around Albert. It never seemed awkward. It felt comfortable, as though neither of them needed to perform or fill every empty second with conversation. Eventually, Albert stood and pointed toward a narrow path leading along the shore. "Come on, where are we going?" "You'll see. That's becoming your favorite answer. Maybe." They spent the afternoon exploring parts of Silver Pine Harry had never seen before. Albert showed him a hidden cove surrounded by wildflowers, an abandoned lighthouse that no longer appeared on tourist maps, and a tiny bakery owned by an elderly couple who greeted Albert like family. Everywhere they went, people seemed happy to see him. Harry couldn't understand how one person could belong so naturally to a place. Albert moved through the town as though every street held a memory. Harry, meanwhile, felt like someone borrowing a life that wasn't his. As the day passed, however, that feeling slowly faded. Whenever he walked beside Albert, Silver Pine began to feel less unfamiliar. At sunset, they climbed a grassy hill overlooking the lake. The sky burned with shades of orange, pink, and gold. The entire town glowed beneath the evening light. Harry sat in the grass while Albert lay on his back, staring at the clouds. "Can I ask you something?" Albert suddenly said. "Sure, why do you hide so much?" Harry frowned. "I don't hide. You do? From what?" Albert turned his head toward him. "From people." The answer came so quickly that Harry couldn't deny it. He looked away. Albert continued gently. "Yesterday, you told me you wanted to become an illustrator." Harry nodded. "But every time you talked about it, you sounded like you were apologizing." Harry remained silent. Albert sat up. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "When I look at your drawings, I see someone who notices everything." Harry blinked. "Everything?" "The way light falls through trees. The shape of clouds. Tiny details nobody else pays attention to." Albert smiled softly. "But when it comes to yourself, you act like you're invisible." The words settled somewhere deep inside Harry. He wasn't sure how to respond because Albert wasn't entirely wrong. Most of his life had been spent trying not to stand out. He avoided attention whenever possible. He worried constantly about saying the wrong thing or becoming a burden to other people. Somewhere along the way, hiding had become easier than risking disappointment. "Maybe I'm just not very confident," Harry admitted quietly. Albert considered this. Confidence isn't believing you're perfect. Then what is it? Believing you're allowed to take up space. Harry stared at him. For a moment, neither moved. The evening breeze carried the scent of grass and lake water between them. Albert's expression remained calm, but there was something sincere in his eyes that made Harry's chest tighten unexpectedly. He quickly looked away. The conversation shifted after that, becoming lighter. They discussed music, movies, and embarrassing childhood stories. Albert admitted he once fell into the lake while trying to impress a girl when he was 14. Harry laughed so hard he nearly fell over. "You definitely made that up." "I wish I had." "Did it work?" Albert groaned. "Absolutely not." Their laughter echoed across the hillside. As darkness slowly approached, they began walking back toward town. Streetlights flickered on one by one. The roads were quieter now, and the evening air felt pleasantly cool after the heat of the day. As they passed through the town square, Harry noticed several people gathered around a large wooden stage under construction. Bright lanterns hung from nearby trees. "What's happening?" he asked. Albert glanced toward the square. "The summer festival? There's a festival?" "Every year." Harry watched workers arranging decorations. "When?" "Next weekend." Albert smiled slightly. "You should come." "I probably will." "Good." The answer sounded strangely important. They continued walking until they reached the guest house. Neither seemed eager to end the evening. Finally, Albert shoved his hands into his pockets. "Same time tomorrow?" Harry looked up. "Tomorrow too?" Albert raised an eyebrow. "Is that a problem?" "No," the answer came far too quickly. Albert laughed. "Then tomorrow." Harry watched him disappear down the street before entering the guest house. Later that night, he sat by the window with his sketchbook open on his lap. The page before him contained a half-finished drawing of the lake. Normally, landscapes came easily. Tonight, however, he found himself sketching something else. A familiar smile. Dark hair moving in the wind. Warm eyes reflecting sunlight. Harry froze the moment he realized who he was drawing. His face immediately grew hot. "Oh," the quiet word escaped before he could stop it. He stared at the sketch for a long time. Then he looked toward the blue marble resting beside him. Outside, Silverpine slept peacefully beneath the stars. Inside, Harry's thoughts felt anything but peaceful. For the first time, a possibility entered his mind, small, uncertain, and impossible to ignore. Maybe Albert was becoming more than just a friend. Maybe that was why every conversation felt important. Maybe that was why saying goodbye always seemed too soon. Maybe that was why the thought of tomorrow already made him smile. Harry closed his sketchbook and leaned back in his chair. His heart felt strangely light, yet nervous at the same time. He didn't have answers yet. He wasn't even sure he understood the questions. But as he looked at the blue marble glowing softly in the moonlight, one thing became certain. Summer had only just begun, and somehow Albert was already changing everything. Chapter 3, The Summer Festival. The days leading up to the summer festival passed faster than Harry expected. What had begun as occasional meetings quickly became part of his routine. Every morning, he helped his aunt at the guest house, and almost every afternoon or evening, he found himself somewhere with Albert. Sometimes they explored new trails around the lake. Sometimes they sat quietly on the dock, talking about nothing important. Other times, they simply walked through town while Albert greeted half the population of Silver Pine. Harry still wasn't sure when exactly it happened, but at some point, being with Albert stopped feeling special and started feeling necessary. The realization frightened him. Whenever Albert sent a message, Harry answered immediately. Whenever Albert smiled at him, his mood improved without permission. And whenever Albert casually touched his shoulder or stood close beside him, a strange warmth spread through his chest. He tried not to think about what it meant. He failed every time. By the morning of the summer festival, the entire town seemed alive with excitement. Colorful lanterns hung from trees and rooftops. Small wooden stalls lined the streets around the town square. Music drifted through the air, mixing with laughter and conversation. Even the lake looked different, reflecting dozens of bright decorations dancing on the water. Harry spent most of the day helping his aunt prepare for the influx of visitors. By the time evening arrived, he had changed clothes 3 times and checked his phone at least 20 times. Albert had promised to meet him at sunset. At exactly 6 o'clock, Harry stepped outside the guest house and immediately spotted him waiting by the gate. Albert wore a simple dark shirt with rolled-up sleeves. Nothing extraordinary. Yet for some reason, Harry forgot how to breathe for a moment. "You look nervous," Albert said. Harry quickly recovered. "I am not. You checked your phone while walking over here." Harry sighed. "Maybe a little." Albert laughed. "Relax, it's just a festival." The problem, Harry thought, was that it wasn't just a festival. He was spending the evening with Albert, and lately everything involving Albert seemed to matter far more than it should. Together, they walked toward the town square. The streets glowed beneath hundreds of lanterns. Children ran between food stalls while couples strolled beneath strings of lights. The atmosphere felt warm and magical, as though the entire town had decided to celebrate summer at once. Albert insisted on showing Harry every corner of the festival. They sampled local desserts, played carnival games, and listened to musicians performing near the lakeside. Harry laughed more that evening than he had in months. For a while, he forgot about the confusing feelings growing inside him. Then they arrived at a shooting game booth. "I challenge you," Albert announced confidently. Harry raised an eyebrow. "To what?" "Winner gets free dessert, and the loser pays?" "Exactly." Harry immediately agreed. 5 minutes later, Albert was staring at his score in disbelief. Harry couldn't stop laughing. "You talk so confidently. I didn't know you were secretly competitive." "I'm not." "Liar." Albert pointed accusingly. Harry's laughter only grew louder. It felt easy, natural, comfortable, almost perfect. Almost. As they continued through the festival, a voice suddenly called Albert's name. Both of them turned. A young woman around Albert's age approached with a bright smile. She immediately hugged him. "Albert, I haven't seen you in forever." Harry froze. Something unpleasant twisted inside his chest. The woman seemed completely comfortable around Albert. More comfortable than Harry expected. Albert smiled warmly. "Emily, when did you get back?" "Yesterday." They began talking while Harry stood awkwardly beside them. He learned that Emily had grown up in Silver Pine before moving away for university. She and Albert clearly shared years of memories. Every joke came naturally. Every story made them laugh. Harry told himself there was nothing wrong with that. Of course Albert had friends. Of course he knew people before meeting Harry, yet the uncomfortable feeling refused to disappear. It grew stronger each time Emily touched Albert's arm while talking. Stronger each time Albert smiled at her. Stronger each time Harry realized he suddenly felt invisible. Eventually, Emily noticed him. "Oh, I'm sorry. Who's this?" Albert glanced toward Harry. For some reason, his smile softened. "This is Harry." Just Harry, nothing more. Harry hated himself for feeling disappointed. Emily greeted him politely before returning her attention to Albert. A few minutes later, she invited them to join a group of old friends at another part of the festival. Albert considered it briefly before looking toward Harry. "Do you want to?" Harry forced a smile. Sure, the answer tasted bitter. The next hour felt far longer than it actually was. Harry sat with Albert's friends, listening to stories from years he had never been part of. Everyone was friendly. Nobody excluded him intentionally. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong there. Albert belonged. Albert knew every joke, every memory, every face. Harry was simply someone passing through. Eventually, he excused himself and wandered toward the lake. The festival lights reflected beautifully across the water. Normally, the sight would have inspired him to sketch. Tonight, he barely noticed it. "There you are." Harry turned. Albert stood a few steps away. "Why did you leave?" Harry looked back toward the water. "I just wanted some air." Albert studied him carefully. "You're upset." "No, Harry." The gentle tone made lying impossible. He sighed. "It's nothing." Albert remained silent, waiting. Somehow that patience always encouraged honesty. Harry kicked a small stone near the shore. "I felt out of place. Because of Emily?" Harry immediately regretted how obvious he must have been. Albert's expression softened. "She's an old friend. I know. That's all." Harry nodded, though his chest still felt tight. Albert stepped closer. "Do you know why I left?" Harry looked up. "Left what?" "The group." Harry shook his head. Albert smiled slightly. "Because I noticed you weren't there anymore." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the festival seemed distant now. Lantern light reflected in Albert's eyes. Harry suddenly became aware of how close they were standing. Close enough to hear each other's breathing. Close enough that his heartbeat felt embarrassingly loud. "Harry," Albert said quietly. "You don't have to compete with anyone." Harry frowned. "What?" Albert hesitated, as though searching for the right words. "You're important to me." The world seemed to stop. Harry forgot about the festival. Forgot about the music. Forgot about everything except the person standing in front of him. Important. The word echoed endlessly inside his mind. Before he could respond, fireworks exploded above the lake. Bright colors illuminated the night sky. Red, gold, silver. The crowd cheered behind them. Harry instinctively looked upward. The reflections danced across the water like thousands of stars. Beside him, Albert was watching the fireworks too. For a brief second, their shoulders brushed. Neither moved away. Harry knew he should focus on the beautiful display above them. Instead, he found himself watching Albert's face illuminated by bursts of light. The realization struck him with terrifying clarity. This wasn't admiration. This wasn't friendship. This wasn't confusion anymore. Somewhere between quiet conversations, shared afternoons, and countless smiles, he had fallen in love. The knowledge arrived gently, yet it changed everything. Because now Harry understood the truth. The reason his heart raced whenever Albert was near. The reason goodbyes felt unbearable. The reason seeing Albert with someone else had hurt so much. He was in love with him. Completely, hopelessly, and probably far too deeply. The final firework exploded across the sky, scattering silver light over the lake. Around them, applause filled the air. Yet Harry barely heard it. Standing beside Albert beneath the fading glow of the festival lights, he realized summer had become far more dangerous than he ever imagined. Because falling in love was one thing. Discovering whether the other person felt the same was another entirely. After the summer festival, everything changed, even though nothing appeared different on the surface. Albert still sent him messages every morning. They still met by the lake, explored forest trails, shared meals, and spent long evenings talking about anything that came to mind. To everyone else, they probably looked exactly the same as before. Only Harry knew how much had changed. The problem was not Albert. The problem was that Harry now understood his own heart. Once he had admitted the truth to himself, it became impossible to ignore. Every smile felt more dangerous. Every casual touch lingered longer than it should. Every compliment replayed in his mind for hours afterward. He found himself noticing details he had overlooked before: the way Albert pushed his hair back when he was thinking, the way his eyes softened whenever he laughed, the quiet sadness that sometimes appeared when he thought nobody was watching. Harry tried to act normally, but loving someone in secret was exhausting. Some days he convinced himself there was hope. Other days he felt foolish for imagining it. Albert was kind to everyone. Maybe Harry had simply mistaken kindness for something more. The uncertainty followed him everywhere. One afternoon, nearly a week after the festival, rain clouds gathered above Silver Pine. Summer storms were common near the lake, arriving suddenly and disappearing just as quickly. Harry had spent the morning helping his aunt before deciding to sketch near the old lighthouse. The weather seemed fine when he left. Unfortunately, halfway through his drawing session, the sky darkened. Within minutes, rain began pouring from the clouds. Harry ran for shelter beneath the lighthouse roof, clutching his sketchbook against his chest. The wind blew cold droplets across his face. Perfect timing. He turned at the familiar voice. Albert stood a few feet away, equally soaked. Harry blinked. "What are you doing here?" "Hiding from the same storm." They both laughed. The small shelter wasn't large enough to completely escape the rain, so they sat close together on a wooden bench inside the lighthouse. Outside, thunder rumbled across the lake. Rain hammered against the windows. For a while, they simply watched the storm. Harry became painfully aware of how near Albert was. Their shoulders occasionally brushed whenever either of them moved. Every accidental touch sent his heart racing. "Can I see what you were drawing?" Albert eventually asked. Harry hesitated before handing over the sketchbook. Albert carefully flipped through the pages. Most contained landscapes from around town. Then he stopped. Harry's stomach immediately dropped. Several pages near the back contained drawings of Albert. Not detailed portraits. Just quick sketches completed during conversations or quiet afternoons together. Albert sitting by the lake. Albert laughing. Albert playing guitar. Albert looking toward the horizon. Harry felt heat rush into his face. "I can explain." Albert looked up. "Why?" "Because that's weird." "Harry." Albert smiled softly. These are beautiful. Harry wanted to disappear. Instead, he stared at the floor. I didn't mean for you to see those. Why not? Because I'm in love with you. The words nearly escaped. He swallowed them immediately. I don't know. Albert continued studying the sketches. Unlike Harry, he didn't seem embarrassed at all. If anything, he looked touched. Finally, he closed the notebook and handed it back. Thank you. Harry frowned. For what? For drawing me. The sincerity in his voice made Harry's chest ache. Sometimes Albert made everything harder simply by being kind. The storm continued outside. The rain showed no signs of stopping. As evening approached, the lighthouse grew darker. Albert leaned back against the wall. Can I tell you something? Harry nodded. When I first met you, I thought you would leave after a few weeks. Harry looked at him. Why? Because most people do. Albert's smile faded slightly. Tourists come and go. Students leave. Friends move away. He stared out the window. Eventually, you get used to people leaving. Harry had never heard him sound so serious before. Someone left? Albert laughed quietly. Several people? For the first time, Harry understood the sadness he had occasionally noticed behind Albert's smile. It wasn't one specific heartbreak. It was loneliness. A different kind from Harry's, but loneliness nonetheless. That's why you came back to Silverpine? Harry asked. Albert nodded. Partly. He paused. My grandfather got sick during my last year of college. Harry remembered the blue marble. The one who collected those glass marbles? Yeah, Albert smiled faintly. We were close. The silence that followed felt heavy. Harry didn't know exactly what to say. Instead, he simply listened. Albert rarely talked about himself this openly. He passed away 2 years ago, Albert said quietly. After that, everything felt different. Harry's heart tightened. I'm sorry. Albert nodded. For a while, I thought leaving would be easier. Starting over somewhere else. He looked toward the lake. But eventually I realized every place would remind me of him anyway. The rain softened outside. Neither spoke for several moments. Then, without thinking, Harry reached out and gently touched Albert's hand. The movement was small, instinctive. He only wanted to offer comfort. The second their hands met, however, Harry froze. Albert looked down. Their fingers rested together on the wooden bench. Neither pulled away. The moment stretched endlessly. Harry could hear his own heartbeat. He wondered if Albert could hear it too. Slowly, Albert turned his hands slightly until their fingers brushed. Harry's breath caught. Neither of them spoke. Words suddenly felt unnecessary. Outside, the storm gradually faded. Inside, something else seemed to shift between them. Not friendship exactly. Not yet. But something closer than before. Something neither of them seemed ready to name. Eventually, the rain stopped completely. Evening sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the lake gold. Reluctantly, they stood to leave. The walk back toward town felt unusually quiet. Not uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. As they approached the guest house, Albert stopped. Harry? Yeah. For a moment, Albert seemed about to say something important. Instead, he smiled. I'm glad you came to Silverpine. Harry's heart skipped. I'm glad too. Albert held his gaze for several seconds before nodding. Then he turned and continued down the road. Harry remained standing by the gate long after he disappeared from sight. His emotions felt tangled and impossible to understand. The touch of Albert's hand still lingered like a memory. That night, Harry sat beside his window watching moonlight shimmer across the blue marble. He replayed every moment from the lighthouse over and over again. The conversation. The sketches. The way Albert had looked at him. Most of all, the way neither of them had moved away when their hands touched. Harry wanted to believe it meant something. Yet fear remained. What if he misunderstood? What if he confessed and lost everything? The thought terrified him. Summer was moving forward too quickly. University would begin soon. His time in Silverpine was running out. Sooner or later, he would have to make a choice. Continue hiding his feelings and regret it forever, or tell Albert the truth and risk breaking the most important relationship he had ever found. As the night deepened around him, Harry realized one thing with painful certainty. He could no longer pretend his feelings were temporary. He loved Albert. And with each passing day, keeping that secret was becoming harder than falling in love in the first place. Summer always seemed endless until the moment it wasn't. One day, the sunlight still lingered late into the evening. The lake sparkled beneath clear blue skies, and the streets of Silver Pine were filled with laughter. The next, August was quietly slipping away. Harry noticed the change everywhere. The mornings felt cooler. The sunsets arrived earlier. Even the leaves on some of the trees had begun showing hints of gold. Most importantly, the date of his departure was approaching faster than he wanted to admit. In less than a week, he would leave Silver Pine and move to the city for university. Every time he thought about it, a heavy feeling settled inside his chest. He had spent months telling himself that coming here was temporary. Yet now the thought of leaving felt unbearable. Because leaving Silver Pine meant leaving Albert. During their last few days together, neither of them mentioned Harry's departure directly. They continued meeting as usual, almost as if pretending time had stopped. They walked around the lake, visited their favorite cafe, watched sunsets from the grassy hill overlooking town, and sat on the old dock where they had shared countless conversations. Yet beneath every smile and every joke was the quiet awareness that something was ending. Harry could feel it. So could Albert. On the evening before his departure, Albert sent him a short message. "Meet me at the lake." One last secret location. Harry laughed despite the ache in his heart. Some things never changed. When he arrived, the sun was already beginning to set. Albert stood waiting near the forest trail they had first explored together. Without saying much, he led Harry deeper into the woods. The path twisted between tall trees before opening into a clearing Harry had never seen before. At the center stood a small hill overlooking the entire lake. The view was breathtaking. The water reflected the colors of the evening sky, turning shades of orange, pink, and gold. The town looked tiny from that height, surrounded by mountains and endless forests. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They simply sat together in the grass, watching the sunset. Harry wished the moment could last forever. Eventually, Albert broke the silence. "You're leaving tomorrow." It wasn't a question. Harry nodded. "Yeah." Albert stared toward the horizon. "I kept hoping the date would feel less real." Harry laughed softly. "Me too." Another silence followed. This one felt heavier, more fragile. Harry knew he couldn't avoid it any longer. If he left without saying anything, he would regret it for the rest of his life. The thought terrified him. But losing the chance felt even worse. His hands trembled slightly. Albert noticed immediately. "Harry?" Harry took a deep breath. Then another. His heart pounded so loudly he wondered if Albert could hear it. "There's something I need to tell you." Albert turned toward him. The expression in his eyes instantly made Harry nervous. "Okay." Harry looked down at his hands. Suddenly, every prepared sentence disappeared. Every careful plan vanished. All that remained was the truth. "When I first came here, I thought this summer would be forgettable." His voice shook slightly. "I thought I'd spend 3 months working, drawing, and counting the days until university started." Albert remained silent, listening. "Then I met you." Harry laughed weakly. And somehow everything changed. His chest felt painfully tight now. "You became my favorite part of every day. Every place in Silver Pine reminds me of you. Every memory I want to keep includes you." He swallowed hard. "I tried convincing myself it was friendship." Albert's eyes softened. Harry continued before courage abandoned him. "But it wasn't." The words finally escaped. "I love you, Albert." The world seemed to stop. Even the wind felt quieter. Harry's heart pounded violently as he waited for a response. Seconds passed. Then Albert looked away and laughed softly. Not because he was mocking him, because he seemed relieved. Completely, visibly relieved. Harry blinked in confusion. Albert rubbed a hand over his face. "Do you have any idea how long I've been waiting to hear that?" Harry froze. "What?" Albert looked back at him. His smile was nervous for perhaps the first time since they met. "Harry, I fell in love with you weeks ago." Harry stared. Albert continued before he could interrupt. Maybe at the festival. Maybe before that. I honestly don't know anymore. He laughed quietly. I just know that somewhere along the way, you became the person I wanted to share everything with. Harry couldn't believe what he was hearing. You, yes. Albert moved slightly closer. I love you too. The words settled over Harry like sunlight after a storm. For a moment, he could only stare. All the fear, uncertainty, and doubt he had carried for weeks seemed to disappear at once. Albert smiled. You look shocked? Because I am. Albert laughed. Harry laughed too. Then, without thinking, he reached for Albert's hand. This time, neither hesitated. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as though they had always belonged that way. They sat together, watching the last light of day fade across the lake. The sky slowly darkened, and the first stars began appearing above them. Harry should have felt sad. Tomorrow he would leave Silver Pine. Tomorrow the summer would officially end. Yet somehow the sadness no longer felt overwhelming. Because now he knew the truth. Distance was frightening. Goodbyes were difficult. But neither of those things could erase what they had found together. As darkness settled around them, Albert reached into his pocket. Harry immediately laughed. Another marble? Albert grinned and placed a small object in his hand. It was another glass marble, this one deep blue with tiny silver patterns trapped inside. It looked like a night sky filled with stars. My grandfather used to keep this one separate from the others, Albert said. He called it his favorite. Harry stared at it. Albert, keep it. Harry looked up. Albert's gaze was warm and steady. The first marble was for a stranger I met by the lake. His smile softened. This one is for the person I love. Harry felt his eyes sting unexpectedly. He tightened his grip around the marble. Then Albert leaned forward and gently pressed his forehead against Harry's. The distance between them disappeared. The moment was quiet, simple, and perfect. Months later, when university became stressful and life felt overwhelming, Harry would often take the blue marble from his desk drawer and hold it in his hand. It always reminded him of sunlight on the lake, summer evenings beneath endless skies, and a boy with a guitar who had changed his life. Years later, he would still remember that summer as clearly as if it happened yesterday. Not because it was perfect, not because it lasted forever, but because it was the summer he found a place where he belonged. The summer he learned that being loved did not require changing who he was. And most importantly, the summer he met Albert, the boy who gave him a blue marble, 1,000 unforgettable memories, and a love that remained long after the season itself had ended. Thank you for listening to the entire story. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel to support me and give me more motivation to create new videos. See you in the next story.